Okay, now, for this slideshow, we are interested in three elements in particular. Carbon, of course, but there's nitrogen and phosphorus as well. The reason why there's life up here is because nitrogen and phosphorus and carbon are all critical for life as well. You're a carbon-based life form. You know that from photosynthesis we get plants bind carbon dioxide, the carbon from carbon dioxide into glucose for us to utilise and things like that. But nitrogen and phosphorus will also cover as well. So, the carbon cycle, we're interested in cellular respiration and photosynthesis and how it ties into that. The nitrogen cycle is more complicated. In previous years we used to do assignments on this and spend more than a week of doing presentations and whatnot, but we won't do that this year. So, interestingly enough, what percentage of the atmosphere is nitrogen? It's really high. Yeah, it's in the 70s. And so, most of the atmosphere is nitrogen. Okay, it is really important for life. Listen up. It's really important for life, but plants cannot utilise nitrogen gas. Nitrogen's in group 5. What covalent bond does it form? No. How many bonds does it form when it forms a covalent bond? 3. It's a triple bond. Well done, both of you. It's a triple bond. That's a really strong bond structure. So poor old plants cannot break nitrogen out of the atmosphere, but they need it to survive. So we're going to look at the bacteria that are responsible for maintaining life on Earth. If that's your X-Men power, to destroy every nitrifying bacteria on the planet, everything stops. Okay? Because that's how nitrogen gets into the food chain. The phosphorus cycle. Rocks, and rocks. Okay? Phosphorus comes out of rocks. You have to weather rocks, you have to break rocks, and then it gets into life forms. Okay? And is very, very important. Now, you don't need to write that down. Those are your key points. You'll see those on each particular slide. Okay. Now, unlike energy, matter cycles within an ecosystem, and it's reused. And that's why this is called the cycling of matter. The carbon cycle can take a long time. You bind something up in oil, it's in the sediment for 200 million years, 100 million years. It's there for a long time. But if you take the oil out and you burn it, now it's carbon dioxide. Plant absorbs the carbon dioxide. Now that carbon's back into a food chain and it moves through again. Okay, so these cycles can take a very, very long time. The rock cycle, of course, the phosphorus might be bound first in the mantle and then subsequently in a rock for hundreds of millions of years before it finally breaks out and gets into a living thing. Okay, so there's this idea of this basic food web where you have, that won't be necessary. You'll see it'll be clear enough. But obviously you have producers like plants that are taking these phosphorus, nitrogen and carbon and binding them into tissues which then other things, herbivores eat, then carnivores eat, and that's where we're getting our these key components. Now, carbon. We don't do biogeochemical cycles in an assessment form for you guys. That's just the idea. Cycling of chemical substances between biotic and abiotic worlds. You won't even need to write that down. You just need to understand this idea that matter cycles. Okay, carbon. Here is CH4, methane. Major ingredient of organic molecules. Proteins, carbohydrates, lipids. Write those down. Okay? Carbon forms a key component of those things. For example, glucose. What is the chemical formula for glucose? Anyone remember? Yep.
C6H12O6.
Yeah, C6H12O6. Well done. Okay, it's a key component of the proteins. It's in lipids as well. So glucose, very important molecule produced in photosynthesis. Okay, so carbon dioxide becomes glucose. Has an atmospheric reservoir. It's in the air. It cycles globally, methane and carbon dioxide, gets into tissues, might be bound as coal or oil or just buried in the ground in some way, shape or form for a long time. Also resides in fossil fuels, coal, peat, oil and gas. Sedimentary rocks as limestone or calcium carbonate. It gets locked into different environments and then might escape, and then once it's in living things, it's going to go around. So what's the book? Is it Dr. Seuss? Everyone Poops? You probably read it when you were 4.
I remember that.
Okay. Maybe when you were 4 or 5, you may have read Everyone Poops. You poop. That gets processed, which is to say it's exposed to bacteria, and it ends up in the food chain again. And cycles and cycles and cycles and cycles. But it may eventually be bound in something. Carbon can be dissolved in the oceans, okay, to form nitric acid. We covered that previously. So it can be bound in ocean water as well. So it does end up in a few different forms. And of course, so if it's in limestone and then that limestone gets broken down in some way, shape or form, it can re-enter into a food chain. And, or if a fossil fuel is burnt, it re-enters into a food chain. So we don't make carbon on Earth. Be clear on that. You know that matter can't be created or destroyed. So when the Earth originally formed, we had so much carbon available to us, huge amounts locked in the lithosphere, and then it just cycles. And atoms don't get dirty. So you've heard that before, that you have atoms in your body that were in the bodies of other people before, or in worms before, or certainly in plants before. Yes? Peat is like before coal. So a peat bog is like this really, it's a watery, it's a combination of water and a lot of plant debris. It looks black, and in the UK, you can find these amazing pictures. In the UK, hundreds of years ago, they used to, like, by way of a funeral, they'd go, oh well, you know, fabulous person, sorry to see you go, and they'd drop you in a peat bog, and you'd sink. And they take out bodies out of peat bogs, and they're perfectly preserved, albeit black. But they're perfectly preserved because bacteria can't survive in that anoxic environment, so there's no decomposition. Yeah? So the carbon is trapped in you. Now, can I change? Okay. Is everyone clear? There's atmospheric carbon, there's carbon in living things, there's carbon trapped in the rock cycle. So remember, we've got, what were our spheres we looked at? Atmosphere. We had biota. The biosphere is atmosphere, biota, hydrosphere, lithosphere. So what spheres is carbon trapped in? All of them. It's in living things, atmosphere, hydrosphere and lithosphere. It's in all the spheres. Let's be clear on that. Okay? So there's atmosphere, there's lithosphere, there's hydrosphere. All 3 spheres. Now, can I change? Yeah. Okay. There's another quick graphic to illustrate this idea. Okay. Burning or deforestation. You get into the atmosphere. Photosynthesis bound into tissues. Consumption by herbivores. Now we're getting it into tissues as proteins and whatnot as well. Enters the soil via organic matter. Might cycle through like this for 10 million years. But if it ends up in a sediment, it can eventually become oil or gas if it gets buried deep enough, and it can be trapped there for a long time. Now, let's see. Okay, there is more information about how this carbon comes out. Okay, so if it's atmospheric carbon, photosynthesis gives you atmospheric carbon dioxide, ends up in organic molecules and gets passed along through the food chain. Organic molecules, C6H12O6 glucose, O6 glucose, but also proteins and lipids. Yes, because of course where do you get the proteins to build you from? You eat something. Okay, you probably take its proteins, tear them apart, and just use the atoms to rebuild you, and also to extract energy. Yes?
So we write this down.
Well, this is important in the sense that you need to have a better idea you already have this one. Shh. You already have this one. Carbon in. This is all of the key areas that carbon turns up. Okay, in a little more detail. So, cellular respiration is, what's the formula for cellular respiration? Do you remember that one? If I start with glucose, C6H12O6 plus O2 leads to, what am I doing with this? What am I trying to make? 6H2O, CO2. Something like that? Yeah. Because I'm trying to make ATP, yes? So, remember, cellular respiration is the opposite of photosynthesis. So what you start with in photosynthesis is what you end with in cellular respiration. Okay? So, cellular respiration, there's our CO2 again, up into the atmosphere. Okay? So, if you know, there's always, this is the carbon cycle, there's always carbon going up and carbon coming out. We're just adding additional carbon into this. Decomposition leads to carbon dioxide. Erosion and volcanic activity and fires and burning, all of these release carbon in one form or another. That's where the lithosphere comes in. And then marine skeletons, which are made of calcium carbonate, you end up, when they die, it ends up in sediment, ends up in limestone. So, and dead plants and animals can lead to coal or oil. These processes, these ones are generally rapid. So carbon can cycle pretty quickly, but lithosphere is a slow one. Okay, yes?
What would be the main way that carbon goes from hydrosphere to the atmosphere?
Hydrosphere into the atmosphere, how would it escape as... Once it's...
How does it go from the ocean?
Once it's... I'm wondering the same thing now that you ask it. How do we get carbonic acid out of the oceans? I know there's a limit. The oceans can only absorb so much carbon dioxide. So how does it escape from the oceans? I would actually literally have to look that up. Okay. I don't know. I don't see it being pulled out by living things.
Evaporation.
Directly
maybe.
Fish and chips. If it's just.
No. I'm going to have to look it up because you've bound it now, and evaporation is going to release water vapor, but it's actually formed. No, I'm just going to look that up. Yeah. So, but that is too much crosstalk. That is specifically a breakdown in more detail of how things move around. Okay. I mean, we mentioned in a general sense your proteins and lipids. I think you understand the idea that carbon is trees, for example, through photosynthesis, take atmospheric carbon and produce tissues that we consume, so we can get the carbon out that way. The glucose that we consume, so we get carbon out that way. Or any herbivore does that, and then it goes that carbon gets passed on to carnivores or omnivores that consume the herbivore. Okay, so there's quite a few things going on. The slowest one, of course, is lithosphere. Now, how are we going? Am I able to change? That one you'll need to revisit. You should almost be able to draw that as a diagram of some kind. Like on the previous slide, you saw a simple diagram of things moving around. And you should be able to do the same thing. You should know the formula for cellular respiration because it's considered prior knowledge from year 9 and year 8. Yeah, okay. Well done. You're a prince among men. So yeah, you should know the formula for cellular respiration and photosynthesis from previous work. Okay. Okay. Now let's have a look at. Now is that an active link? Have a look. No. Okay. Okay. Now, cycle. Now nitrogen cycle is a little more complicated, but from genetics, you know about nitrogen bases in DNA. What is that letter right there? Not a trick question. Nitrogen, 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 nitrogen. Like, long story short, if you, all living things on Earth have DNA. You don't have nitrogen accessible to things, you don't have life. Okay, it's critical. Okay, so nitrogen is essential. It's needed in the manufacture of proteins and DNA. It's found in all living cells as nitrogen bases in DNA. Plants plus nitrogen gives you the synthesis of amino acids, which are incorporated into plant tissues, and then and off it goes from there. Okay, so again, when the plants have access to nitrogen, not the gas though, they can't use the gas, and we'll cover that, then they go on to make tissues which then herbivores can consume and then carnivores can consume, and that's how the nitrogen gets into the cycle. Now, nitrogen fixation, N2 in the gas has that triple bond, that covalent bond. You know your chemistry now. Very strong bond. Plants have not evolved to break that bond, which seems bizarre, but plants have only been around for a few 100 million years. Okay? Whereas bacteria, they were just sitting here twiddling their thumbs for 3.1 billion years, just doing stuff. Okay? So everything else, multicellular life, is the new kid on the block. Okay? So, by certain microorganisms as part of the nitrogen cycle. You see that on the next slide. Plants cannot absorb atmospheric nitrogen, but they can absorb this and this. So write those two down. Ammonia and nitrate. Plants can absorb those, then they can get access to the nitrogen, because guess what? This NH3, the bond here, not a very strong bond. The nitrogen to the oxygen bond here, again, not as strong as that triple bond, that nitrogen-nitrogen triple bond. Okay? And so we'll look at nitrifying bacteria and denitrifying bacteria who are just gumming the works up. But again, the key things here, it's in nitrogen bases, and plants produce the amino acids that are then used to build proteins. So it's in proteins, it's in DNA. Okay? I should, okay, yes, I agree. I'll make that bit red up there.
Is that a cram card symbol or not?
That's just the happy tree, but yeah, you should know that. I can't be everywhere. I do my best. I do my best to provide directionality. When I do my revision for the exam, I will literally write out which slides you need to know. Okay? So this slideshow, but to be honest, if I've done my job right, it's almost every slide of every slideshow. Because I shouldn't have too much extra material and things. Okay. It is a happy tree. Now, can I change?
No. Yes. No.
Okay.
You can change.
You'll see the next bit of the cycle, which is a little trickier. Okay, I'll give you a few more seconds and we'll go from there.
Yes.
Okay. And don't stress out, we can always come back. Okay. Now, have a look at this here. I don't know if you've ever picked a clover out of the ground or something like that and had a look at these little nodules, but look at the little nodule things here, which everyone likes to squeeze, you know. I'm sure that's a hobby for some people. They go and pick legumes and squeeze their nodules. Now, legumes are very important in the nitrogen cycle because they have nitrogen-fixing bacteria live symbiotically in the legume root nodules, these things here. And those, so it's those bacteria. So I don't know if you've you're aware that farmers used to have this idea that, well, they knew this from practice, that you could plant one crop in a field for 1 year, plant a different crop in the field for the next year, and probably the third year let it just return to grass, to clover preferably. And then it would rejuvenate itself, and then you could go again. Okay, so you'd have to leave a field fallow for a period of time, yes? And with the advent of industrial fertilisers, we didn't have to do that anymore because we could just add fertilisers, nitrogen being one of them, to our soils. Okay? And the reason why you needed to leave that field fallow is because you grow your crop, it sucks up all the nitrogen and phosphorus out of it, and you take it away and sell it. And then you grow another crop, sucks out more of the nitrogen and phosphorus, and now it's very low levels in the soil, and you take the crop away. And because it's not rotting in place and returning things to the soil, it's being taken away. And so clovers, any kind of legume, will actually, because of the bacteria they carry, they'll return nitrogen to the soil. Okay? And so that rejuvenates the soil. So what we have here, we have basically that idea there. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria can take atmospheric nitrogen. Okay? The plant uses some, and excess goes into the soil. Write that down. That's key. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria, they take the nitrogen gas, the plant uses some, the bacteria uses some, but the rest goes into the soil. Yes, or you're just stretching. Yes. So that's what happens there. Now, these other steps here are part of a cycle. Don't freak out, I've got a picture. See that picture there? Let's look at this quickly, then we'll go back. Okay? Here's our atmospheric nitrogen. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria living in the legume root nodules, doing their thing and releasing nitrogen in the soil. Well done them. Nitrogen-fixing soil bacteria down here as well, same thing. And then there's ammonification. Now we've got NH4+. And then there's different bacteria again, nitrifying bacteria. And now we're at NO2-, which plants can use in both cases. And decomposers, if plant material or a dead animal, they get a hold of it, decomposes, they'll also put ammonia into the soil, which plants can use. So that's important. And then you've got your nitrates here, sorry, NO3, not this one here, NO3- as a nitrate, not a nitrite, a nitrate plants can use, and it goes from there. So this particular cycle, the legumes can immediately use the nitrogen provided by the nitrifying bacteria, but other plants need to get here through down to nitrate and then subsequently can use it. Denitrifying bacteria seem to gum things. They're not gumming it up, they're just part of the cycle, but they take this valuable nitrate and they release nitrogen gas. So after all of these steps to get to this point here, the part where plants can actually utilise this resource, these bacteria will return it. I forgot this one. Lightning. It's kind of cool. Lightning is actually able, because it's high energy, so you've got your N2, which is what it can actually do is the nitrogen, lightning as it comes through, it breaks the covalent bond in the nitrogen gas, and that nitrogen ion wants to bind to something, oxygen is nearby, and off it goes. So lightning is a great way of naturally producing nitrates. These ones here. What is it the plants can use? Nitrates. But nitrogen-fixing bacteria and then ammonification and then nitrification is all needed to get to this part here where plants can use things. So let's pop back to our previous slide. And hopefully that's making some... I should put lightning on this slide as well. Okay?
Lightning bolt.
So, ammonification. Decomposing bacteria in soil break down the proteins and amino acids in dead plants, animals, species, release NH3, usually as ammonium, NH4, and then nitrifying bacteria convert ammonium to nitrate, then to nitrate, which can be absorbed by plants. So that's where we're trying to get to. lightning?
Yes.
I believe it is.
Yeah.
Like 10.
We'll get photo.
Oh, that's not good enough.
Well, actually, so
You should change it now.
I'm the one who noticed that. So you get no bats and lightning.
For the venomous
Actually,
society.
no, the viewers at home right now noticed it.
Oh, no.
Okay. So
Hey guys, just about some class here.
so that there has to get from there. We have to get to there through other bacteria. This is one type of bacteria. These are other bacteria that get us to nitrate, which plants can use. Okay, so in an exam or a test situation, not uncommon to be given a picture to help you out a bit. If the gods are feeling a bit cranky, they might make you fill things in on the picture. But
Oh, it's a little.
you should understand this idea that nitrogen gas can't be used. Now, lightning can get you to nitrate, or nitrifying bacteria in legumes will then release nitrogen in the soil, which then other bacteria will grab a hold of, change it to the point you get to nitrate again. So there's ammonification and then nitrification, and then you've got your nitrate again, which plants can use. So it seems like a very long, drawn-out process to get to nitrate, which then the plants use, and then you eat the plant, and now finally you've got your nitrogen. But yes, that's just the way it has to be, because plants cannot use N2. They do not have the enzyme that would be needed to catalyse the reaction to break that strong covalent bond. Okay, so there you go. That might be a job for you in the future. Be careful. So I'm gonna make life better for everyone. I'm going to produce corn that can use atmospheric nitrogen and crack the bond, and now I have corn that doesn't need bacteria, and then the gene jumps into weeds. And now I have weeds that can grow with an unlimited source of nitrogen to them and start to take over everything. Or in Interstellar, it's a fungi. It's a fungi that actually is able to utilise atmospheric nitrogen, and it just starts killing everything. It just starts sucking up all of the atmospheric oxygen for cellular. It's doing cellular respiration, yeah, and it's growing uncontrollably. So it's using more oxygen than is being produced by other plants, and so they're going into oxygen debt globally. Okay, so the future of the world is suffocation in that case. So be careful for those of you who are going to modify plants. Okay. So be familiar with that idea. Let's have a look at phosphorus quickly. The phosphorus cycle. Okay. Now phosphorus again. Now, for you, what's the DNA backbone made up of? Phosphorus and a 5-carbon sugar. So again, if you don't have phosphorus, so remember, you've got your nitrogen is in the nitrogen base over here, and you've got your phosphorus in the spine of the DNA, and all living things rely on DNA. No phosphorus, no nitrogen, you've got no life on this planet. Okay? So, again, used as the main component of the DNA. Okay, this is how it reaches from the lithosphere, then to the hydrosphere, and then through food chains and back. So, phosphorus is found in rocks. You have to weather the rocks or erode the rocks, break it down into particles, and then you get different compounds which are accessible by plants first, and a lot of things eat rocks, then animals, and off it goes from there. Okay? Most of Earth's phosphorus is stored in the form of phosphate in soils and rocks, which they release their phosphate when they are eroded, or whether in a cycle which takes millions of years. Phosphate mining releases more into the environment, so you get algal blooms. So here's us releasing phosphorus and nitrogen, we're spreading it onto our crops. But of course, what happens if those fields are right beside a river or near to a river and you get runoff? So rain falls, you get runoff, and you end up in a situation where you may get an algal bloom or something like that. Okay? And things like piggeries and even dairy farms, the amount of poop that from them that gets into waterways, and that carries the same nutrients, phosphorus and nitrogen, that other things can use. And so it ends up, of course, causing algal blooms. They can absorb phosphate directly through their roots. It's then bound into plant tissues. All phosphorus makes its way to the ocean, where it's buried in sediment and sedimentary rock. Don't freak out. Let's have a look at this simple diagram. This is a much nicer one than the nitrogen cycle. Rocks contain phosphate. Break down the rocks. The rocks, different things here, but ultimately it gets into plants and then into animals, and then eventually it's going to get into the ocean in some way, into a waterway in some way, shape or form. You can have excrement, you can have dead plants and animals falling to the ocean floor, getting in sediment, and ultimately it forming sedimentary rock and being bound again. But it might be kicking around up here for thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years before it finally ends up in a waterway. So I'll go back to the previous slide. Now I'm looking at that, that's probably a bit wordy, but it pretty much, that's actually a simplified version of what I started with. Okay? Key idea, found in DNA, released from rocks through weathering. Plants can absorb phosphate directly. Those are the key ideas. That it's from the lithosphere, it's not found in the atmosphere. Okay? It does reach the hydrosphere a little bit, but it ends up in it's in living things at that time, or as particle matter from erosion, and then it ends up in sediment eventually, and then forms rock, and then your sedimentary rock, and then it's bound there. So those are your key ideas. Okay, and unlike nitrogen, plants can utilise that from the get-go. Okay, again, very, very important within the context of life on Earth because of DNA. Okay, now I'll just check something quickly. That may be the last slide. Close. Oh, interesting. I was looking for that. Oh. Okay, I'll leave it at that one there.